No, Maura's not going to be here. All right, I'd like to call the Board of Finance March 11th meeting to order. It's 6:02. We have a quorum. Linda's just going to get her glasses, and Moira's not going to be here. So I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. We could rise. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Tonight, we have the presentation from the Board of Education on their budget, and you're up. Whoever you're gonna do it, Matt, or is okay?
Well, first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to come before and talk through our budget processes, and one that we kicked off in November and just culminated on our end with the board approving a 2.47% increase. So I know we've provided an awful lot of background information and background material for you. I have about 12 slides or so that just frames a lot of the information you have, and certainly we'll have time for any Q&A that we'd like to do after that. So overall, just to frame the entire budget, $67,221,317, an increase of about $1.6 million over current spending, which reflects in a 2.47% increase. Just to contextually frame out, as we go through the process, we track what other boards of education are doing in terms of approved budget increases, just to put things into context. I know it's small up there, but it's 55 districts, and at this point we're about 43 out of 55. We feel that the budget overall is a responsible representation of what services the board needs to move forward. But just wanted to show what that looks like. This is something we'll update all the way through if there are any adjustments, and as we go towards the public hearing.
And all the other systems are all moving around too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Moving. I mean, every couple days it's really a moving target, so we continue to query that.
Do you have the data as to each line, who's which one?
I do. I don't have it with me. I know in our DIRG right now, I've kept an eye around kind of the local ones. I know Avon is about a 1.3, I believe, that they passed. In Granby right now isn't approved, but it's about a 2.4. Everybody else right now locally is to the left.
The left being higher or lower?
Higher.
Oh, that left.
That
You didn't mean political.
All right, so as we went through a process as a board last year, actually, to reframe our district vision, our set of core beliefs, so we use those kind of guiding principles as we work through the process, really with the theme of upholding the excellent quality in our school system and really trying to be thoughtful with our fiscal planning and really creating great schools for each and every one of our students. I know that we were asked, I think, Jeff, you talked a little bit about it last year in terms of we kind of show up with our number, what's the process that occurs beforehand. So I just wanted to speak through that a little bit to give some context to what does go on behind the scenes.
It's a new slide.
What's that?
It's a new slide.
It's a new slide.
Yeah, this whole one is different than the superintendent PowerPoint in your binder.
Okay.
So we start our process in November, and it's really a building-based process where department supervisors work with their principals in identifying needs across different areas of the budget and put together essentially their building-based needs that they forward to us in December up at central office. And what we do is we meet about 3-4 hours with each of the building principals, and they present to us their budget includes staffing, equipment, textbooks, all the different categories. We really start there to talk about prioritization with the recognition that we try to look forward and we want to meet. We want all the things we can want, but we can't necessarily get them. But actually, to put some context to it, that roll-up number in December, in terms of what building principals presented, was about a 5.5% increase over spending last year. We work with principals on an ongoing basis, a series of meetings, workshops with the Board of Education. We move that number through prioritization and real kind of analysis of different things from about a 5.5 to about a 3.2, which ended up being a 2.47 of what we really felt comfortable with in terms of identifying hard needs that we really felt we needed to move forward with to both meet the needs of our students, our staff, and again, try to take advantage of declining enrollment, these other factors that are there to drive costs down. So that's the initial piece of the process. We sit here today and we know we present to you, and then we go back for further conversation and we'll take it from there. But I wanted to try to give a context to the breadth and the depth of it. We put a lot of time and effort into putting the number forward that we present to you tonight. Really taking a look at pressures that help to alleviate cost, as well as pressures that escalate cost in our initial planning. So the enrollment, we've talked a lot about the enrollment over the 3 years I've been superintendent, and what reductions can be attributed to enrollment. So that certainly is a main driver we look at on an annual basis and continue to do that. We're aware of what's going on at the state, kind of the influx of information that comes out, as I know you are, and we have to be cognizant of those changes as well. We continue to have conversations with the town about areas we feel we can take a look at, joint services, joint efforts that either improve service delivery or reduce cost. The one main significant area that we're able to take advantage of again this year is that insurance consolidation that took place, but there are other things that we'll talk about a little later on in the evening as well. And we're mindful of that cost of living increase number that we shared and we talked through at the 3-board meeting a few months ago. So the opposite spectrum of that, contractual obligations, in and of themselves when we rolled the organization forward this year, is a 2% increase just in contracts. We have a middle school class size issue that was a result of a combination of reductions in staff. Last year we took 3 sections out of the middle school, 3 teaching positions. Felt we would be okay and still within class size. We just had a weird anomaly of 36, 37 students moving in the middle school. You don't normally see that, but it pushed class sizes up and above from 5 classes over the guideline in the previous year to 35 classes over the guideline. So there's a single class FTE that we're requesting in this new budget to address that. Special education costs are something we've talked about the last couple years. We still have needs in those areas that I'll talk through a little bit more as we get deeper into the presentation. This is a historical slide we came up with last year just to kind of start to think about that relationship between enrollment and historical budget increases over time. I know often we're posed with the question of enrollment is going down, the overall budget number is not going down. Has there been a correlation? Is there a correlation? Pretty inconsistent over time. I think what you can see from that is we've really tried to stay consistently in a very responsible zone in the last 5 to 6 years and aim to do that again this year as we're still in a state of declining enrollment. It's a busy slide, but I'm going to focus on the bottom portion, the numerical portion of it. So this is that kind of snapshot of the decline in enrollment from 2008 and 9 to where we're projected to be next year. And you can see a significant decline of over 700 students, or 15% of enrollment during that time frame. I've split up the different categories of our staffing to show you what that looks like over the same duration. So certified FTEs are really our teaching positions, our classroom teaching positions. And you can see we've reduced 22 positions over that time frame. Administrative FTE, we've gone down a few administrators during that time frame as well. I know that that's a question I've been asked, and there's been dialogue about that in the past. Enrollment goes down. What are your administrative needs looking like? What does your administrative FTE look like? So I just want to be mindful of the fact that we had reduced several years ago a elementary assistant principal. We reduced a dean of students position at Simsbury High School, which was almost a 4th administrative position. 2 positions I just wanted to talk a quick bit about are the 3rd assistant principal at Simsbury High School. That one often comes up in conversation. We put that position in when the enrollment at Simsbury High School was 1,500, and we're projected to be at 1,460 next year. So I just don't see a significant enough decline along with the new administrative mandates at that secondary level to really have a productive conversation about a reduction in administrator there. The other position is the assistant principalship at Squadron Line that people have asked me about. And Squadron Line, when I was the principal there, I think was 880 students. It's about 580 now. When I was there and it was 880, there was actually a third. It wasn't another assistant principal, but it was a full-time position. They call it a resource position. That person was administratively certified and helped with evaluations and helped with other things. That position was eliminated. So I feel at this current size, I would definitely still advocate for the assistant principal position there. And we're also moving our preschool operations to Squadron as part of this facilities and enrollment study. So over the course of the next couple of years, we will have added another 100 students or so to that baseline number. But definitely, we will continue to monitor that Squadron Line situation as well. But just wanted to put that information out there if it helps frame conversation later. Non-certified, paraprofessionals, clerical, nursing staff, we've made some reductions there as well. For a total of 53 full-time positions, or 7% of our total staff.
Matt, do we have that slide in our presentation someplace or not?
You do not. You have one that has similar information but not broken out like that.
Okay.
Just speak to this point, I just find it interesting that the teachers, the certified FTEs are the ones that have gone down the least, which may be a good thing, but at the same time, you would think that that's the most correlated to the number of kids. And I totally get that it doesn't always work out that the kids are distributed in the right place to...
Yeah, great question, and I think...
About that?
Yep, so some significant declines there, but also during that time frame, we added full-day kindergarten, which was 7 positions.
Okay, yeah.
We added the Simsbury Reading Intervention Program at the elementary level, which was 7 full-time equivalents. We completely revamped the elective offerings at Simsbury High School, moving to an 8-period day, which was 6.5 FTE. So some pretty significant programmatic changes over that same time. So certainly if we had stayed in a static state, you'd have more of a decline.
And you were also adjusting your classroom size during that period of time, weren't you?
I think during that period of time, the only classroom adjustment was the 2nd grade, which had historically been 18 to 25, and we moved it to 22. So that did have an impact during the year we did that, and I think like 08, 09 actually. To tell you the
Matt,
truth.
are these
Yeah.
FTEs including what's in grant programs?
That's everybody, yes.
That's everybody,
That's
including what we
everybody.
have in grants?
Correct,
Yeah, because kindergarten we added through paying with a grant program.
right. So this is a new slide where I'm trying to continue to address the question and look at it maybe a little bit differently of how does the decline in enrollment play out to lead to classroom reductions? You know, kind of what is the math about it? Linda, I remember your question at our 3-board meeting where I said we went down 75 students last year. We were able to take 10 classroom positions. This year we're slated to go down 100. We can take 3.
Right. Doesn't
The math doesn't always make sense. So across the top is the total projected enrollment number right now. Is the total enrollment number right now. Underneath it, the 4140 is the projected enrollment number. So down vertically here, we're projected to go down 114 students. So when you break it out across the different levels, because we project it that way, we're projected to go down 51 students at the elementary level. Sounds like a lot. We're able to take 3 classroom sections as a result of enrollment. But with the 5 schools, if you just kind of spread it out across, you're talking about 10 a school, now you have 7 grade levels, you're really talking about 1 kid a grade level. So while it seems significant sometimes, unless it falls just right for you, you're unable to absorb that FTE. The middle school, which is 7-8 there, where we have the issue with class size, we're slated to go down 36 students. The reality is with that reduction in the additional FTE, which really adds a section, it's like a 0.2 of math, a 0.2 of reading, a 0.2 of language arts, we're able to get classes back within the guideline range, but you're only talking about 28 students across the entire grade level cohort, in 12 students in grade 8. The high school, 27 students, pretty large cohorts. It averages out to be 7 students per grade level. So depending on how it falls, I mean, this doesn't quantify everything absolute. I understand that I'm trying to show different ways to look at the data and show that it's just not as easy as saying you go down 24, you can take a classroom. The other enrollment trend I thought was important to talk to the board about, because over the past 2 years, we've talked about special education costs in particular, some staffing we felt we needed, as well as outplacement costs. This is just a snapshot of our overall enrollment trend. Since 10-11, that's gone down almost 500 students. In our special education enrollment trend, which has stayed completely flat, actually gone up 1 during that same time period. And if you actually looked at staffing reductions across the categories in this same area, you'd see 20+ staffing reductions kind of on the regular ed side, and you'd see almost 20 on the special ed side. And that's an area where we definitely have a little bit of right sizing to do, and some needs that need to be met that we're trying to get right this year with the budget presentation. But it's just interesting to see that the 2 trends do not match.
Can I ask a question of special
Sure.
education enrollment? Has that definition remained stable over the years in terms of how you capture that number? Is it students who may need full-time help, students who may need remedial help in certain subjects, or has that been constant? It seems like a high number, 541 students.
It's 12.9, I think, percent, or close to 13%. It's very close to the state average. It's a little high. It's higher than the DERG average. I think the DERG is about, I don't want to guess, but I think around close to 12. We've been, over the course since I've been involved in the district in 10 years, between high 13s, and probably the lowest we were was 11.8 or something like that. So the way we identify stays pretty consistent in terms of the category, and it's a broad range of student needs within that 541. So it could be anybody, Jeff, from somebody that needs some support just with speech to somebody that has significant learning disabilities. Okay, so what I wanted to go through were some of the identified areas are really program improvement cost drivers, new costs that we're requesting in this year's budget, and really have them in 2 categories, as you can see on the slide. So the certified staffing request, I'll give a little bit more detail on in a second, but a total of $234,000, or a 0.36% increase. Non-certified staffing, which is actually 1 position, an increase of about, it's actually a couple positions, $94,000. The large increase here is the $250,000 we were requesting in outplacement costs. We still continue to be challenged with current year in covering these costs. There's an unpredictability to these costs, but I think we also have, at the end of the presentation, some new news that may help us kind of offset some of that cost. Yes.
On the outplacement, these appear to be large dollar items. How has that number gone up in the last few years?
So that number has gone up from, I don't have the slide handy, but Andy Burke has it. 13, 14 to 17 last year, when we came before you and spoke, there was a spike of, I believe, 6 students. We went from 17 to 23, and we were really faced with challenges last year in the current year budget, actually a deficit of about $750,000 that we worked to close throughout the year. In doing so, we'll talk a little bit about it later, we really taxed the IDEA grant, which is a 2-year grant that we received for special education services, in terms of the ability to be flexible to meet these needs. One of our challenges, truth be told, is with that 23 student projection last year and the money we requested, we had anticipated a decline in our ability to bring a few students back and hold that number down. We haven't seen that decline, so we're again in a situation where we're in a bit of a shortfall current year that we're working to close. The actual number this year to next year is up 1. It's 23 to 24, so it's not up significantly, but our ability to cover the cost isn't where it needs to be.
Clarify for me, we're talking about students who are going to magnet schools and charter schools, or what?
No, we're talking about students that we don't have the ability to service because of their significant disability or needs within our district and need to go to specialized schools outside of the district. Some of these tuitions, one tuition could be over $100,000. So these are students with pretty significant needs. I mean, in that number are some transitional students that go out to a short-term diagnostic placement. Our goal is always to bring these students back into district and build strong programs to meet their needs. But it's not just tuitions going out to normalized education settings.
And they carry big transportation costs with them too.
They do.
Okay, I was confused because I haven't, from your data, I know you've got a lot more kids who are going to charter schools and magnet schools and so forth, and I'm sitting there saying, okay, but this is just the
This is
change.
relative to special education.
Yeah, and this is just the change.
No, it has nothing to do with the group you were just talking about.
Yeah.
This is special education.
I understand.
Yes, this is the change.
But this is the increase that you're asking.
Above last year.
When we come back to this in the budget numbers, could we focus a little bit more on what the, what we're, I could figure it out, I can divide .38 into 250,000 and figure out roughly what that we're talking about, but just so that we have a good handle on what
Yes,
we're.
absolutely. Yep. Technology is another area we continue to have a desire to move forward with. Our teachers are really embracing new ways to use technology to meet our students' needs. Students are embrace the new delivery models, so we've increased devices over the past couple years. This will allow us across different levels to increase the number of iPads and Chromebooks, which are really becoming the go-to device. Aaron, am I correct in saying that, in terms of instructional needs and a real solid, less expensive platform to allow us to meet this new standardized testing that's all done online. Chromebook is about $300, where an iPad is much more expensive than that. So we're really shifting in that direction.
Will that reduce the need for text? I think we asked this last year and I forgot
Yeah.
the answer, but does that, in the long run, reduce the need for textbooks?
We haven't seen that. I know a couple years ago when districts were starting to move in this direction, there was a big hope that that would be the case. The online textbooks that are available through the companies, the same companies now that utilize the texts, are ensuring that they stay in business as well and charging the same as you would for the textbook. So there's certain courses where you just need the text to access to move through, to re-up it. Yeah, but it continues to be an area we'll look at. Software and licensing needs, some new needs in those areas that Burke will add a bit of detail to later, but overall it's looking at about $769,000 in new dollars, or a 1.19% increase. Okay, so another layer of detail just on the staffing requests. To break out that $200,000+, there's a half-time teacher we're requesting at Terriffill Elementary School. Terriffill is the smallest of our elementary schools. They have one special education teacher that spans 7 grades. And with the number of students servicing and the ability to get from grade level to grade level, we feel we need additional staffing. Math tutor support, it's non-certified support. These are people we already have in place that we'd be adding some additional hours to extend the opportunities for at-risk identified students in math. The .98 is one position. It's a para position, that paraprofessional for special needs student who is in our Birth to 3 program, who will be moving into our Ready, Set, Go program in kindergarten and requires one-to-one support to be successful throughout the day. And you can see that is offset at the elementary level by the 3.0 reduction in classroom sections. At the middle school, I talked about the 1.0 FTE to address the class size. We're also asking for a 1.0 special education teacher to support with transition needs. And by transition needs, what we're talking about is students K through 6 being supported in programs like Ready, Set, Go at the elementary level, now move into the middle school where we try to foster more independence and set those students up for success. We need to program in a way that's a little bit more focused for their students' needs with fewer numbers of students on a teacher's caseload. and this will enable us to do that. At the high school, a part-time special ed teacher, and then a full-time, it's a non-certified, not quite a full FTE, job coach. This is also special education, and part of the transitioning of our high school special ed students is to get them prepared to go out and be productive members of society. So this is work out in the field. We get these students internship experiences, job experiences, and they need adult supervision and support when they're out on those sites. All right, so that is small. I apologize. This is kind of the roll-up slide. This is where we look at, on the top of the slide, what the additions are in terms of moving forward. The bottom piece of the slide are the reductions. So we've talked about most of these things, the biggest driver certainly being the negotiated contracts and the estimate of the contracts yet to be settled. So those first two line items alone, as I mentioned, if you roll forward our organization, are a 2% increase. We've rolled the staffing increases that we just spoke about, some additional equipment increases, some testing and supplies to meet the mandates around this SBAC test that we're talking about that is at both the elementary, middle, and high school level. The out-of-district transportation and tuition, we'll come back to that number, and some increases in OPEB insurance, which we now have a little bit more favorable news on, we'll discuss, but all rolled up, you're looking at an increase of 3.73% over current year spending. And then we look at what we're able to take out of that number and net out of it. And certified staff retirements, we have 7. So we always look at the difference between an outgoing salary and the hiring or the replacement of a mid-level salary, and we're able to capture some realized savings there of $175,000. The decrease of the 3 sections, $234,000, and then the favorable news in our defined benefit pension contribution and our health insurance costs really net out at a 1.26% decrease, and then overall that's how we come to the 2.47% number. The last piece, we really, yeah.
I just on that last, sort of, basically penalty items, athletics,
Yes.
transportation, student activity stipends. There was a line in your budget, it was on page 27, one of the yellow sheets,
Yeah.
for contracted services and public carriers, which I assume that is a portion of, what is that 100,000?
So this is the increase to that line item that you're speaking of, Jeff, on page 27. So we have our general transportation costs, both Salters handles both regular size buses as well as vans, and handles many of our out of district special ed routes.
I was trying to understand that a little better. It looked like there was a $115,000 increase there, and it was a 5.4 increase for special education and athletic transportation costs, and I didn't know whether it was previously in a different line item, and if no, is because the population is significantly higher. You've said special education is just one higher. I don't know if we've added more athletic programs, and I would have thought that reduced gas prices might have alleviated some of the increase, so I was surprised to see a 5.4% increase in that line item. Is there a good explanation?
Yeah, well, one piece of the explanation is in our athletics budget historically, the transportation had been covered by pay-for-play. We've been running at a deficit with pay-for-play, so we moved to shift the transportation of the athletics budget into the operating budget. So that's the significant increase you see.
So the pay-for-play is what, 200 now?
175.
And so the 115,000 is largely associated with that.
90,000 is associated with that. The remaining 25,000 relates to out-of-district transportation increase.
So when you say you shifted into the budget, before you used to pay for play would kind of support itself, and that went deficits, and now it's, you just put it
And
into
we've
the
been
budget?
shifting over the past couple of years to cover about $50,000 deficit.
Gotcha.
And is that just because you have fewer students playing and therefore paying?
Playing
So
sports?
you have a model that we've had conversation at the board about, that as enrollment declines, we need to continue to talk about, because it's not really a sustainable financial model. unless you start making program decisions, obviously.
Right, or allowing kids to play who have less skill? Is that, just, I mean, is it because you're selective and cutting kids from teams and?
No, we have a very, very broad and high percentage of kids involved.
Right.
And there's sports like
I mean,
track and field where high numbers of kids participate,
Yeah,
and
okay.
as your enrollment goes down, those are actually the sports that impact the pay for play. It's the very ones you're talking about, providing kids opportunities, because there just aren't as many kids. But sports like basketball, baseball, fixed number of minutes, fixed number of innings, fixed number of spots, it's difficult to really open those sports up to limitless numbers of students.
I guess, and I didn't see any offset, I'm sure it's in there, in the 15 number, it would have been much larger. I'm taking it, had it not been for the dramatic decrease in gas prices.
Unfortunately, Jeff, the way we, the town and Board of Ed, working with regional bidding to we do fixed prices on an annual basis for our diesel, our gas, and heating them. So in good years, you're feeling happy because you're locked in, and this is one of those unique years where we locked in and then the prices go down. So we don't get that fluctuation within.
For next year? For next year, we already locked in?
We actually have locked in for next year, and we are at some more favorable rates. But based on what we're seeing in the current year, I mean, I don't see anything but an upward trend based on total routes. We have had to add additional vans because when a student goes to an out-of-district placement that's an hour and a half away, sort of the worst case, but it's very common that they're about an hour away. We don't have the ability to put an existing route together. It often ends up being yet a new route. So that's really what we're...
I know Salters does a great job, but when's the last time you guys went out for an RFP on transportation?
This is the end of a five-year contract. There's one more full year. This is, I believe, the last of the 5 years. But the issue, when you look at our transportation costs, isn't the rate per mile or the cost per bus. We were able to, in the last budget, we were able to reduce 2 regular routes, which did increase some, the distance of our routes, but we were able to decrease our fixed costs. But it's the special ed transportation that we have the most difficult time with, and is going to be a continued area of focus.
And that's something we're starting to try to look at and approach a little bit more regionally with special ed directors in other communities and close by of what other students are going to this particular placement, and can we share the cost, because the share of putting 2 students on a van as opposed to 1 takes it from 35,000 to 15. I mean, it can be dramatic. So we will continue to look at ways to do that.
Yeah, it seems like there ought to be a consortium of sorts, or I mean, even with FERPA, I would think that there ought to be an ability to collaborate either with the schools that are providing that special education or.
Well, we certainly have those conversations, and in some cases it works out well. In some cases you don't have. We transport up as far up as an hour and a half away in some cases. So to find the realization that a student in an Avon or a Granby, you might not be able to realize it, but we certainly work on it and we'll continue to do so.
And that hour and a half away might be one child.
Right.
It's very expensive on it. If you look at our overall transportation costs for the coming year, and you just run some rough numbers on the number of trips per day, we're running, somewhere around 7,000 student trips per day, and it works out to about $1.50 a trip. So we're pretty good from an efficiency standpoint. What blows the budget is the variability of those highly specialized trips that we have to provide for some of the kids within special education.
But what I'm hearing is that as the price of a barrel of oil goes from $120 down to $50 or whatever it is, you don't really accrue much of that benefit.
Not immediately.
At least immediately, yeah.
Right.
Burke, when does the contract come up for renegotiation?
The end of the 15-16 year, I believe.
That's for
salt.
but for.
No, I mean the gasoline.
Gas was unique this year. It's the cycle that we have worked on is typically an August 1st start for all those fuels, and when we because of the volatility, Tom, Roy, and I, would go down to these meetings, and they decided to put it out to bid, and they wanted to lock in early. So this is one of the rare instances. Normally, we're like waiting until July, and then they have a strike price that as soon as the market hits it, they will try to lock in. This year, because of the favorability, they felt now they can lock in earlier. So now we actually do know what our prices will be next August.
Through
And they're
August,
not
huh?
lower?
They are lower, yes. They are.
What happens after August, though?
But there are increases in. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Out-of-district
What
increases.
What happens after August?
Yes.
That's the. We
Yeah,
just
we
want
locked
to know
into
what.
after
That's
August.
August 2016, right?
We have locked in for August, is what I'm saying.
Tell me what date the contract ends, you lock into.
I believe it's August 1st, 2016.
8/1/16, 8/1/15.
16.
Yeah, we're locked all the way.
We're locked in current year as
August 1st,
well as
2016.
prices for next year.
When did we lock that in?
We did 2 instances. One we did back over the summer. The second one, which was the extended.
So you did a 2-year instead of a 1-year.
No, we did a 1 year and then
Separate-
we did
separate
we
year.
did a second purchase when we saw the gas prices tank.
So then is that savings reflected in this budget?
It is on my side.
Where is it on your side?
If you look at our pupil transportation costs on page 26 of our detailed budget, we are expecting to be up in that line item over what our current appropriation is.
110,000.
So, pardon me?
It was significant, wasn't it? You're on page 26?
Yes, I am. So the contracted services is essentially all of those, both regular and special ed. So we are above our current appropriations. So I am factoring in that overall, while we are going to see some benefit from that, we still have to make up for the volatility.
I was having a hard time, I think, with looking at the expenditures because it was over a 7-month period, and so I was kind of taking 7/12 and multiplying it out, and I guess some of it
You
is.
can't always do that based
You can't
on the
always do
school
that.
calendar year. That's the problem, because we're not a business that has the same 12 months schedule for all costs. So our projected end of year column is something that we're saying that's our best option.
I guess what I'm asking about is like on this one here, for example, if 1.3 million covers July and August when there is no school except for the end of August, and then September, October, November, December, January when there is school, and then we have February, March, April, May, it seems like the remaining 5/12 ought to be lower, and we ought to be coming in more consistent with what your appropriation was. It wasn't only this category, it was quite a few where I'm assuming some of it is seasonal, but it seemed to me that the projected end-of-year expenditures didn't make sense in some of these categories, and this was one.
Our total fuel line item within this transportation group is budgeted at $230,000. We've expended $169,000 to date. We have $60,000 available in the current.
And then what is it for next year?
I don't have a detailed line item budget for next year because we haven't loaded that budget yet.
But just roughly, what was the decrease in fuel cost? So if you have 230 so far spent this year, what do we think we'll spend next year in the first 7
We
months?
budgeted $230,000 this year. We've spent $169,000. Available balance is $60,000. I think we're going to come close to zero this year on that, but we're over in out of district.
No, I understand, Brooke, I'm sorry.
So we're.
I asked a different question, I apologize, I wasn't clear.
Next year, while I would expect that we may be down maybe $20,000, we have an overall issue with the cost of the routes and the volatility. So we are looking at this overall group and saying, for this for this in total, we are going to need 115,000 more.
So next year, we're only seeing a $20,000 decline in gas.
That's my estimate at this time.
Is that similar to what we've seen on the town side? Joe?
Sorry.
I mean, it looks like it's under a 10% decrease in,
Off the top of my head, guys, I don't know. I mean, I know, you know, on my side, I was a little bit fortunate. I don't have a volume variance with mine. I know there's no increased demand in the number of miles that we're going to drive as a service on the town side. On a rate perspective, it varied from area to area. I don't want to wager a guess. I have it on my computer.
So,
I'm just surprised.
Can I kind of follow up with a bigger level question on the whole fuel costs? And so let's not go down on line item, but page 31 is where you have heat for buildings and your utility. That's also flat. And I guess what I was kind of asking in general is, I was a little bit surprised. We're shutting down the modulars. We've been talking about savings coming out of that just for the modulars alone. And now on top of that, we're adding a rate differential, so we should be paying lower rates. But if you look at 31, we're not showing any savings, it looks like, in the budget for utilities. And that's where I was just kind of, if we go big picture, can you relook at utilities and make sure we've built in, you know, all the modulars shutting down and then the rate differential? Because we're showing a zero increase.
So as of now, we've already captured in this current year the modular savings for the Latimer modulars, which is the second phase. So we are not budgeting for any significant modular savings for the upcoming budget. But in terms of the overall,
Not removing the central mods, that's a whole different piece.
So we're not shutting down the centrals now?
One more year.
So you're saying, when because I asked this question last year, and you said it was already in there, and we couldn't see it in last year's budget. So you're saying now we can't see it in this year? It's coming through the actuals, but we didn't budget it?
last year we had an increase in our lease line item, which was the cost to remove the modulars. So that cost isn't in our upcoming budget. What we already adjusted for last year and is the same this year is the fact that Latimer doesn't have modulars. But we don't have that shutdown cost again this year. It seems like there should be a modular impact in this year's budget unless I'm totally missing something. And there should be a rate impact. Is that we already assumed it last year, but the offset in the overall budget was in our maintenance category that we had a removal cost within the operating budget. So do we see a savings of the removal cost then? Utility, yes. Because we don't have to budget for that. And how much is that? In the upcoming year. Last year, the removal cost was approximately $40,000 total. So I guess if I go back to that sheet where you said the things that we know that are saves, it seems like there's a couple more, and one should be a utility rate. And this is an example of removing modulars. If you don't have to do that again, that's a save. So there's more things in that save rate that it seems like we could quantify. From an electricity point of view and from a propane point of view, while we have a fixed rate price for electricity, and we're very glad that we're not, seeing what's happening with the standard offer. We just locked in for a new 3-year agreement in December. It's a different contract than the town. That's the only one where we're not in the same consortium. But for natural gas, for example, we went out with the town for natural gas bid last year. The bids were not favorable last fall. Tom and I spoke about it today. We were advised by the consultant who helped us with the bid to keep the standard offer, but we don't know where we're going to be at next year. So there are some things that are more favorable, such as the heating fuel and the diesel, but there are other things that are going up. Even with the fixed rates on electricity, the half of your bill that is the fixed portion is great to know. The delivery and the transmission portion, they're looking at maybe about a 7% increase is what they're estimating. So there's a lot more at play than just, we've locked in some of our things down. There's things up and there's things down.
I guess, yeah, it's hard to know what's locked and what isn't locked, so it's hard to know what's going up and going down, but this was the one category that I was really struggling with too, because aside from the public transportation, I was looking at these numbers, and we've had record-breaking cold. We've spent $206,000 in the first 7 months on page 30, it looks like, in heating, fuel oil, and what have you. And even assuming the remaining months come in at the budgeted monthly rate, which I just divide your total 737 by 12, you'll have spent $513,000. But if it comes in the current monthly run rate, you'll have spent $354,000. So you're looking for a $737,200 appropriation. But with oil prices reaching a historic low, you've locked in at a different rate now. When I look at this, you've got the new boiler at Henry James. That was, when we budgeted for that's installed, right?
That's been installed for several years, yeah.
And that was to dramatically decrease the amounts. And I look at, 2013-14, we went from 562 to 737. So it doesn't look like we took the savings in that year. And I think it was installed 2 years ago. Because I've only been on the board for a few years, so I remember being part of that approval process. And when I look at this, it looks like the number you might need would be somewhere between like $350 and $600. So there's a couple $100,000 of extra money in here that I think, if you took a hard line at these numbers, we ought to be able to save. And those are real dollars. When I was looking at your budget and what you're looking for, I felt that there were areas where we have gained efficiencies, where we can achieve decreases, and we've taken the increases in places. In other places, we've taken decreases where actuarially, for example, your health insurance costs have gone down. So you've got an actuarial number. You've taken the decrease, but in these other areas, you've not taken the decrease. And I know there are some unknowns, but I feel like you've been overly conservative, and I guess I'd feel more comfortable not taxing our folks up front for those unknowns, and you're coming back later if for unknown reasons things don't go, if things go kind of in the wrong direction on all counts.
So
We'll entertain your coming forward, and maybe you're
from
gonna
a-
need a couple $100,000, but $200,000-$300,000, it's a big increase.
So from a philosophical point of view, the reason, if you look historically at this budget going back 10 or more years, this is an area where we've had the most cushion, frankly. That is an area we don't have as much knowledge from year to year of what a winter is going to be like. But this isn't a different level of, we've actually trimmed it down in the last several years. But that is going to be a segue to when we talk about special ed and trying to chew up other areas of our budget of what we've had to deal with last year and this year. That's how we've managed to cover costs and not have to come back with an overall deficit. Right. So we're looking at an overall appropriation and not saying within one particular area, if we budgeted more here, but we have to use it elsewhere, that we're not trying to do anything other than cover the bottom line.
I guess when I look at it, I'm looking for, completely accurate budget in each of the line items, and if you need to have slush funds in certain places so that if you need to grab money, I understand that, but of the $1.6 million increase, I think there's an opportunity to shave off, roughly $600,000 looking at these line items with no impact to programs, no impact to staffing. And that is significant in a time period in which we are trying to keep the mill rate at zero. Over 10 years, enrollment has declined, 15%. And I understand it's not one-to-one, but staffing has dropped 1.9% over 10 years, and spending has increased by 31.7% over 10 years. So when we compare our increases to other towns, we also have to recognize that there are towns like Avon, our per pupil expenditure is roughly 5% higher. Glastonbury, 5.6% higher. West Hartford, 7.4% higher. So while they may be taking lower increases, their per pupil expenditures are much higher. And I can tell you that in towns like West Hartford, they provide the range of services that we provide. I don't know enough about Avon and Glastonbury, but I understand from people I know living there, they specifically moved to those towns. Someone is considering now moving either here or to West Hartford because they're the only two towns that offer Chinese, for example, in the greater region. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can come up with a budget that really gives kind of credit to the really great work you're doing. And I think some of your per pupil expenditures may be inflated by having these kinds of funds that aren't as precise as they need to be. Don't impact staffing. They don't impact really much of anything. You may have to come to us at some point and say, you know what, we have a few things that were unknowns that all went in the wrong direction, and we need a little bit more money. But, you know, that's why we've got reserves, and that we've tried to plan for these kinds of unknowns.
You have more to go through?
I do.
Why don't you go through, and then
Yeah.
we'll, at the end, we'll kind of get into overview thoughts, where we
Good.
think.
I mean, this is the last slide, and we had a Board of Education meeting last night where we talked through some favorable factors that I'm going to have Bert go through that I think will help us to alleviate some of the cost in the current operating budget that we presented at a 2.47. I think you're familiar with conversation that's gone on between boards, or between Bert when he's been here, and your board about some of these things. So in totality, I think this is really good news. As I said, we shared it with our board last night. It's evolving, a lot of moving parts, but among the three categories are OPEB, an energy efficiency agreement that we're looking to enter into, and hopefully the creation of a proposed non-lapsing account that there's been conversation going on. We could save another 0.67 to the overall operating budget in dollars. That's about $430,000 or so that would be coming off of the 2.47. But we wanted to initiate that conversation a little bit tonight and have Bert go through those three things and just enter them into kind of the Q&A because they weren't part of the PowerPoint stack that I went through.
What's the third bullet, Matt?
Bert's going to work through each one of them
Okay.
and provide you
I'm
some
sorry.
detail on each one.
Okay, well, similar to the positive news received by the town when the final OPEB actuarial calculations came in, we were very pleased with a significant decrease of nearly $104,000. You see the estimated impact that we're able to account for now. The other two items.
Let's go back to the actuary. On that, we'll talk about it at the end, but that actuary used the 7% return, and on OPEB, we have set a 7.5%. So, Joe, we've gone back to the actuary, and the number could even be larger depending on if we want to stick to the percent we've used. So, we could even get some more savings there, but that's something.
How much is that 0.5% worth, do we know?
Yeah. It's up on a piece of paper over there.
116,000 in total.
Huh?
So we'll have it later.
But your point is that she made that change without
She
any
made-
direction
right.
from our board.
Right, but she
or
went
from
to a
the town.
7, right,
Yeah.
from our board, but still, even with the conservative one, everyone's saving some more money. That's why I think the Board of Selectmen put it into theirs before they passed it, the Board of Ed. It's just new news
Right.
in the last week, so it's,
And that 16 basis points you say is 104,000?
yeah.
Yep.
It could be 116.
But if she went to if she left it at the 7.5, do you know what that 16 would go to?
I'm not sure their share, I just know what the total is. I'm just trying to
It's going to be more,
get it right.
it's going to be more than 104, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good number.
116?
Of course, you're looking at the
Yeah,
Board of Ed's
116.
Well, they
piece.
got like
Right.
75%.
Right.
They got like 80,000.
Okay, so the proposed energy efficiency concept, now, you recall from the fall, Tom Roy and I were here, we talked about similar programs with different approved vendors from the Clean Energy Fund from the state that's funded with utility rates, and ultimately we have both an Eversource, formerly CLMP, and CNG portion of proposed incentives for 3 different projects, the largest of which is the high school, and the others are Henry James and Tooten. A little under $1 billion. Their energy incentives were about $620,000 roughly, and so what we were talking about was how to try to go about funding that. What this bullet point here speaks to is the so-called on-bill financing option that was being looked at, I think similarly by the wastewater treatment plant, but it's considered a form of debt. So there's a process involved to make sure that that is approved, which has to be done through the Board of Selectmen, and then as is the case for that wastewater treatment plant project, there would also be a Board of Finance role in it. So we're hoping to be able to get that process finalized. We're working with both Shipman and Goodwin as well as Bob DiCrescenzo. Joe and I are going to look at the audit aspect of just how to account for those monies. But we'd like to try to move forward. We would expect about an $80,000 return in operating budget decrease for electricity, and that could be different, again, as we talked previously, but that depends on if there was any other financing sources. We're just going with the fact that at a 0% rate of interest spread out over 4 years, right on our utility bills, we'd still be able to net savings and
number there.
lower the operating.
So you'd save 80,000,
Right, that's our.
and if the town came in and instead of using as the other lender, we'd come up with how much money?
It could be about 150 if it was
No,
all
I mean, how
paid
much
up
would we
front.
have to put up?
And if it was
We'd have to invest how much?
370.
370, and you'd get an additional savings?
Right.
If you invested 370, what's the annual save? 150?
Yeah.
And in here is 80.
So you get that back in 2 years almost.
Yeah, but the 12
Very,
basis
very
points
quick.
is about 80.
Quick payback is very unusual. You get such a quick project, but it's very, attractive.
That's something we have to get serious on and talk about and make sure the funding's in place so they know which way to go in their budget. So they get the full savings or they get the partial savings.
Right.
But they're gonna get some savings, we just can enhance it if we want. So this is the conservative, it could be more, could be twice as much.
Okay, so again, the last item, the board is obviously familiar with, having talked about the statute that allows the authorization of a non-lapsing account for unexpended education funds. And based on where we're looking at with our internal service fund, the health of that fund, as well as the favorable experience that we're seeing this year, we feel that being able to set up this account and being able to anticipate favorability this year to try to utilize the comfortable position of our internal service fund would allow us to create about $400,000 of turn back, we would estimate, at the end of the year. Of that $400,000, we talked previously about the need for us to restore those 2-year grants, the federal grants, the IDEA grants, where we really had to tap into at much higher levels last year to close that. That was about a $150,000 difference. So we'd like to be able to restore those to what has been our traditional levels, and then we would see another $250,000 estimated that would be available for the
Outplacement.
the non-lapsing account, which then can be earmarked to cover those special education.
We're going to talk about that later, but it appears right now, if they don't make a payment, when we set up this account, they'll have that money available, some to solve their immediate problem and some to go into budget relief. So I think it's something, we've been talking about it, but it's time we have to get serious in the
Is
next.
that a one-time hit, Peter, so that they save for next year's budget, but then they have to put it back in for the following year?
Well, what it allows us to do, Barbara, if we do the grant as well, that's the flex zone that we've always had to adjust to the unpredictability of the outplacement. And in closing last year's gap, we're unable to do that. So it really puts us in a risky position to be able to respond. So this would be taken care of next year and then providing the flex within our grant to be able to kind of cover the unanticipated.
So you don't think we'd see this sneak back in the following year?
The only way it would, I hate to say sneak, but the only way you would see it back in is if the hard numbers and outplacement continue to escalate, and we'd have hard data to support that.
Right, and that's not really slipping back in, that would
Right,
be
the sheer
needed
number
for growth.
the sheer number of
Right.
students.
But to
right.
the extent that you have favorable variances in other categories going out in the future, they're going to be available to provide some relief for the following year, and you have to use it in 12 months, right?
So I have to clarify that. I was going to talk about that after they left.
You didn't.
This fund continues in perpetuity. The way the statute is written, as Linda pointed out, and I have to acknowledge that she was correct, is that it can build.
Should I go na 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 na?
I know. Listen, I spent more hours trying to prove you wrong than it was probably worthwhile.
She's the statute expert.
I put this in West Haven, and that's how we follow the policy. So don't tell them. But it's 1% per year. So in essence, it could grow. And you put 1% of your operating budget every year into it. We've made a slight change to what we recommend you guys pass later on or on Tuesday's meeting. That would actually just cap it at 1%. That's it. That's as big as the fund balance can get.
We control it, we can cap it, we can get rid of it, the Board of Finance can oversee it, and I think it's a good flexibility for them because they do have their budget, there's surprises in their budget, they have some variances sometimes, they can use those variances to solve other issues, and, we can see by that fund, if it's building, then they're over budget. If they hit 1% every year, then that tells you something, but if it doesn't, it allows them flexibility. I think it gives them a lot of financial
Jeff,
flexibility.
to your point, we, much like you said, we look for areas that we can reduce costs, and if we can collaboratively get some of these things set, we move that 247 to about a 180 at this point, with some moving parts still, so we certainly have some things to talk about, but it doesn't impact program, doesn't impact service delivery, so, we're pretty excited about that news at this point in the process anyhow.
I mean, that obviously, I think we're all supportive of ensuring the integrity of the programs. I mean, that's a given, but it's interesting because we don't have a lot of time, so I don't want to tell too many anecdotal tales here, but the number of folks moving into town for the Jackson Labs, I work out at UConn Health, are looking at properties, and the realtors, I don't know if we have any realtors in the audience here, but I feel like they are doing us a disservice because they are highlighting our mill rate, and there are a number of people who are trying to convince them why they should be educating their kids in Simsbury, and they're saying they're going to move to Avon because of a lower mill rate. And as that occurs, and as our population, school-age population, continues to decline, it continues to put a burden on you guys, because fewer students obviously translates to not be able to spread costs out, perhaps the way that you've been able to. So athletics, for example, it's kind of a shock to me to hear that we've had such a decline in our students playing sports. The years...
Well, I don't want to mislead. The overall decline has not been that significant. We have been covering a deficit in other areas over a period of time, coupled with what we see on the horizon as a decline. We're trying to make a budget adjustment to true it up. So we haven't seen a complete fall off in participation. I just don't want to mislead you on that.
Are there other areas you're going to go through? Is it?
This was the last.
That's your last? So
Could you back up 2 slides just quickly for a moment? It's that one there, yeah. The last 2 items, you did this slide before we knew what, obviously, the defined benefit, well, maybe you knew what it was then, but are there going to be more changes in the health insurance cost? The 300,000 number you've got in there was just a guess, I think, at the time you did this slide, right? You were estimating what we might be able to get out of that service fund, and we may be able to do more.
Right, it wasn't meant to be the final. It was a conversation between Lisa Hebner, Joe, Matt, and myself about what is a reasonable amount to assume, and we got some guidance from Bob Lindbergh on a preliminary basis. We're now actually going to work on setting of rates, and it's going to happen next Wednesday. Joe.
but if we want to say, in addition, we want to take excess reserves 300,000, your share is, let's say, 225 of that, that should enter into the conversation. Once we have our discussion about where we're thinking of going, we can throw more money that way if we feel comfortable.
Well, clearly, a month ago, when we were playing around with the mill rate sheet, and Burke, you told the Board of Ed that I had thrown out like $1 million worth of things that we might be able to do. I think the number is actually higher than that because, Joe's working with some estimates on what the town will see in terms of fee income, interest income, and then there's this piece from the service fund that we sort of are skirting around because we're not quite sure just how much we can use or how much we might want to use. But the point that I was trying to make then was that there are some things that we can do to try and maintain the mill rate where it is now and not get an increase. And yet, with all these other little pieces that are popping up from one place or another, we may actually have an opportunity to reduce the mill rate.
But what I see is on your budget, the opportunities we have to work on is, A, the savings on the energy savings, whether we want to fund it or not. We might want to revisit your 150 number to make sure that's the right number in total. But if we come up with $300 and some odd $1,000, you can save more in your budget. So that's not in here, we can put that in. Number two, we have to make sure that we feel comfortable with how the self-insurance fund is working this year to allow you the opportunity to maybe get some favorable variance this year. Both boards will get it, Board of Selectmen and the Board of Ed. And to use that, if we set up the non-lapsing account, which I assume we will, to give you some flexibility, you're going to use that in your budget. So that's key that we have to decide that. Lastly, also, we have to talk about the OPEB, the return we're going to use, because we got more savings there by using the right 7.5% rate, not the 7. So your share of that will be, let's say, $80,000, somewhere in that range. We don't know until the actuary calculates it.
On top of the 103.
Yes, I was talking to her today, Becky, and I told her to hold off, because later on, we can also talk about if we put even more money over there'll be another savings. But that conversation our board has to have too. And, you know, it's a newer topic. We might not do anything there, but I told her just to hold off before we do a calculation. So, and then we talk about the use of reserves. I think we're going to discuss that, what the excess reserves are. But just for numbers' sakes, if we chose a number of 300,000 in total, your share is roughly 75% of the insurance usually? The 70?
Depends on.
I won't go 80, 77.
All right, so let's keep it simple. I can divide that by 4 and figure it out, you know. So let's say it's 75. So if we had the 300,000 number, that'd be, 225,000? Yeah, so there's a possibility there, you know, depending on what we do, to give you some more relief. So I think with all that we have some numbers to work on to give you some opportunities. I sense.
No questions?
Yes.
I have more questions
Sure.
before you finish.
So, but I just sense that we have some opportunities to get in a range where we're not talking about cuts, so to speak, in programs or things like that, you know, I know we're hitting the self-insurance fund hard, but we do have $6.5 million of reserves there that have been eating at me for a few years, and we're going to use them somehow, or get a course that's responsible way to use them, and I think that's what we've been trying to do the last year. So I think we're on the cusp of coming up with something that can be sustaining for a longer time. So, now, any other questions here? I know, Jeff, you have a few more to go through particulars. Linda, I assume you have?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I do one of them.
Do you want-
Well, let's say on pages 32 and 33, the yellow sheets. And again, this may be my own stupidity when it comes to looking at Excels and what have you, but I was looking at what appeared, I think there was a statement in here saying no increase on these 3 line items. But there's pages 32 and 33, but there's a 1.1% increase shown. And it appears that we're projecting coming in below budget this year, but we're seeking $185,000 more in appropriations than we spent last year. And so I was just trying to,
Page 32.
32 and
So look at
33.
your projection, 4.8, and if the budget 5, and you're budgeting again 5.89.
Like on page 33, it states no increase, but then it does
The
show,
operational plant category goes back several pages, though. So this group, this 06 group begins operational plan on page 29. So I think you're seeing the culmination column there, but you're looking at a smaller subset, Jeff. So page 33 is the summary of that whole operational plant group from those prior pages. So I think you're
Starting on 29, right?
I think you referenced page 32. you
Yeah,
were looking
yeah,
at.
I was on 32 and 33.
So while those categories there are not going up quite as much, showing about roughly a 50,000
I showed 185.
for those three. Right, a total of 100.
Well, 185.
If you go to the green pages, you get the delta and the summary up front. So on page 11, you're saying for the total operation of plant category, we're up 54,000. And then the detail you can refer back to.
So I thought it was 1.1%.
It is. 54,000 is the 1.1%. You see it on page 11.
When I look at the roll-up on page 26, no, I'm sorry, not 26, 32, looked like it was going up much more. Looked like it was going up 185,000. Our projected year-end expenditures are 4.875, and we've got appropriation for 5.089. So we're, I mean, it seemed like we were going up dramatically more than we needed to. I mean, we've got the year-end expenditures projected at 4.87, and we're looking for 5.089.
So we do have salary costs within that group that are going up.
For custodians?
Yeah, correct. The salaries that are known. So there are other aspects of the.
Okay, so these, I think these categories then are deserving of a better explanation, because the way they read, supplies custodian, supplies care and grounds, and supplies operational and vehicles. So, I mean, it appears to be supplies. Page 32.
Well, I think, Jeff, just go back to, start on page 29.
No, I understand it's a roll-up, but
Right, the 5.089 is just those two categories of supplies, right?
so we've got,
It's all the pages prior to that.
It begins on
Supplies is only 230 of the 5 million.
begins on 27.
right, okay. Okay, I get that. So then if I look at all the different pages, I guess and just going through them, I guess this is where we're talking about the energy savings, but,
Well, so is that where you would expect to see, so I still have the two big ones, which is, we had that one-time expense that hid the savings of closing the modulars last year, and that came out, you said it should be 40, and then there's something on rate, and I don't know how much it is, but there's something in there on rate you told us. And so, there ought to be something else on one of these categories that's a decrease, and I don't know where it should be, but it seems like there should be something somewhere. And I can't see that it's in here.
between electricity,
Based on the mod removal, is that what you, or?
No, the mod removal is last year we had savings, but it was blinded by the fact we had the cost of getting the removals done, which you said was about 40. And so that's one piece, and the other piece is the conversation that we have negotiated a lower rate in, and where are we seeing that rate?
Yeah, you would think it would be on the first line of page 30.
yeah.
Right. And if you just go big picture like he's trying to do, and you look at the green, you can see the increases, and you can see the only place we have decreases is insurance and pension. So,
The actuarial areas, because when you look at oil and electricity, it just seems like there's an opportunity to budget, if you look at the run rate for the year, between $350,000 and $400,000 less. I mean, there's a lot of money in those line items. When I spent several hours going through the budget, trying not to look at anything that could impact staffing or costs, recognizing that we already have impacted staff by renegotiating certain benefits, putting a higher burden on our teachers as it is. So they were already bearing the brunt of some of that. So I was looking at other areas where we could hopefully come in closer and I think highlight what you're doing for our kids, which is per pupil expenditure, you're doing a great job, but I think it ought to be lower. I think we ought to be more competitive with West Hartford and Avon and these other towns in terms of per pupil expenditure. And still producing these extraordinary outcomes. And so when I see something like 350, 400,000 out of 1.6, it's a big chunk. So if you could take a look at those numbers and maybe refine them.
I can certainly refine it. The challenge, and I know I can sort of picture, going back several years, I can picture Nick at one of these meetings with a level of frustration about these
It's still
projected
there.
numbers, and it's still there. And I can tell you that the hardest thing to do is to go back and try to true these up. Kiroshin and myself have worked on this for the past several years, and there's a pretty significant area that we're trying to fund adequately for, and that is going to be in the instructional summer tuition, some of our contracted program supports for special ed. Those are some cost areas where we have been trying to catch up. So you'll see you'll be seeing some shifting of those starting budgets and taking some of the projected surplus in insurance and pension and trying to true those up. The Ready, Set, Go program is an example. Last year, you may recall, where we added staffing, and we created in our chart of accounts a separate program which didn't exist before, just for those staff, both certified and non-certified. So now we have a cost center there that's something that we're able to track on our financial system to a much greater degree. There are more of those, and each year we're trying to do a better job, and I definitely agree we can do a better job of truing it up. But in the aggregate, we are definitely concerned just as much as you are about the net current expenditures per pupil. So if there is cushion in one area, it's definitely because we're needing to make it up in some other area, and we have to do a better job each and every year of trying to track those. One of the ones that Matt mentioned earlier is the athletic department. It's unique because we have almost half of the expenditures coming from fees, and then the half from the operating budget. We've looked at what the rate of those fees are, and we're definitely amongst the very highest. So even if you keep
when was the last time those were changed?
it's probably been 4 or 5 years at least, I would say. But as we continue to do statewide surveys, we are still in the top 3 or 4. And it's still rare. We're in the minority of districts that even have a fee at all. So within that minority, we are at the very top, in the top 4 or 5. But we've actually looked at that. That was something that was discussed at our workshop, because just trying to sustain that, even if your enrollment doesn't drop much in the participation, your costs are going up, but your fee is the same each year. So it's been a challenge to try to address these structural issues.
It is a philosophical issue, though, because I paid those fees for many years, and we were a big user of the sports programs. I'd love to see, like we have in West Hartford, our trash included in the tax rate, and at least it's a deduction on my annual income taxes. April 15th moves in the rise, and I'd rather see perhaps these fees, incorporate my taxes and get the deduction. But there are certain services they offer in towns like West Hartford, for example, that we just don't offer here as part of our tax base. And that's, I think, so I think that's laudable. I understand that. I was going to ask about, though, it looked like we've got stipends, coaching stipends. Is that the $461,000 on page? What page was that?
Student body activities, it's the 10,000 series. It is on page 43. And what you have there is both stipends for activities and clubs, the faculty that oversee those, as well as and that would be things like musicals and those types of things, and then the coaches. All of those stipends are based on the LCA contract. So a portion of the increase is just the contractual increase that we're showing.
You answered my question. I was going to ask it.
And that's about That's the $10,000 increase for all of those stipends for all of those positions.
It just seems like you've got so many people in town, volunteers with extraordinary expertise that if it weren't for the union contract, I'm sure you could find volunteers probably for many of these positions, but
They don't have to
But it's a
be
union.
all members of the union, but that sets the compensation for those part-time stipended positions. So we've got a total $10,000 increase, and that's really to cover the contractual.
Jeff, any more? Linda?
I just wanted to actually talk to Jeff a little bit about your perception on the per pupil costs. I thought I heard you say that you thought they were getting better, and looking at page 3 of this, and let me preface this by saying I appreciate that Matt and Burke spent some time with me this afternoon going over a lot of detailed stuff, and I appreciated their time. But this was one area that we also talked about where I expressed a concern that Simsbury is, relatively high on its per pupil cost, particularly when you're comparing to the other local towns that I consider are benchmark towns, Avon, Canton, Glastonbury, West Hartford, Granby, with the exception of Farmington, which is only $50 higher per pupil than us. But also looking at the trend, and of course we've only got 3 years here, but we went from being number 14 to number 13 to number 10, number 1 being the highest cost, so the worst. So we're kind of not moving in a good direction. And I did, with my own little back of the matchbook calculations, which I know are not the audited calculations that you guys represent here, but just looking at the 2.47 proposal compared to last year, that's a 6% increase. So I'm really glad to see you coming in and saying you think you can knock that down to 1.8, and I didn't do the calculation to see what that translates into, but that sounds like a small number until you factor in the decline in students. So the per student cost is actually, I think, going up at a concerning level.